Hello and welcome back to Modern World History with Dustin Fowler. In this unit, we're going to start looking at the Industrial Revolution, and we've already kind of set the stage for this. We've talked about some of the scientific innovations that have occurred, some of the Enlightenment, that people were questioning the way things have been. They've started to add new knowledge and new understanding through observation and reason, and this led to exploration and new renaissance in architecture and art techniques and things like this. Only a matter of time before people start to apply this to the way we get work done and the way we produce stuff, the way we industrialize. There's a ton of raw materials to be had in the Americas and other colonies that were established during the age of exploration. So, naturally, Europeans are going to continue to evolve that and change the way they do industry. And this is one of the big revolutions, like the invention of agriculture, for example, that's going to really change the way we live our lives all the way up until modern time. So we call this movement the Industrial Revolution. And, really when you think about it, look around your room. There is no part of our lives, nothing that is not manufactured anywhere around us right now. Things that are impacted by the Industrial Revolution. My list includes literally everything. Find one thing in the room you're at. I can't find anything. My TV, the carpet, the rug, the fan, my headset that I'm using for this video, the computer that I'm using for this video, any other equipment that has to do with my computer, my speaker, the lamp, the jar that the plant is in on my side table here. Everything from decorations to equipment to lights to decor, you name it. Everything has something to do with the Industrial Revolution, all the way down to even the clothes that we're wearing. Everything was mass produced, all right? And so this is really, really important and demonstrates the extreme implications of this Industrial Revolution. But here's the thing. It did not just happen. There had to be conditions that were met first. Conditions that enabled industry to take off. And those conditions are going to be the second agricultural revolution. Now, what I mean by this is going to be a time, not the invention of agriculture, that was the Neolithic Revolution, but in this time frame, we're going to start to change the way we produce crops that are going to enable us to have way more crops with way less people making them and way less work going into it. So in other words, we're going to take what we have and innovate it in such a way that's going to enable us to radically improve the amount of food that we're able to produce. And another term for this second agricultural revolution is usually it's associated with the mechanization of agriculture. So we think about the Industrial Revolution being the use of machine tools and things like this that enable us to produce stuff in mass. But that same technology is going to be applied to agriculture. And really, ironically, this second agricultural revolution is going to get started just before the Industrial Revolution at the beginning of the 1700s. Maybe a little bit before, but we usually are going to associate the year 1700 with the start of the second agricultural revolution. All right, and again, these are going to be the conditions that are met. And the first of these things that are going to lead to these agricultural innovations is what we're going to call the enclosure movement. Okay, the enclosure movement. Now, as you can see, you've got these fields here with these enclosures, these fences. That's what we mean by enclosures. They're going to be fences that go around the farms, separate them from other people's land and territory. Now, you might be thinking, well, every farm has that, right? Well, it used to be that many of the farms had shared fields that would be kind of communally managed by peasant farmers or poor farmers. And what this enclosure movement really constitutes is that these wealthier farmers are going to begin to buy up land from the poor guys, and in doing so, it's going to give them the ability to build these fences around it and then test out new kinds of agricultural techniques that might lead to higher yields. Now, this term yield equals how much of a product the field is ever to make, or how much is produced. So if a field has a high amount of yields, that means it's producing a huge amount of crops relative to other fields where they might have lower yields. Alright, so the enclosures led to better agriculture innovations and also consolidated land ownership to less people who were also more rich. So now those people were able to afford to experiment with that land. Now this here is a big deal because it's going to lead to some of these higher yields that we were just talking about. Some of these techniques that are going to lead to more stuff. And one of these things is going to be the scientific advancements of a man named Jethro Tull, who creates this little contraption here we're going to call the seed drill. Now, it used to be that what people would do is they would just scatter their seed all over creation, just throw it out in the field. And when this happens, you got birds that will come and eat it up. You've got the wind that's going to blow half of the way, and some of it will never take root. But what the seed drill does is it uses this little contraption here that's going to enable a farmer to actually put the seed into the dirt and then kind of gently cover it up. So that the result was people used less seeds, and they lost. I guess what I'm trying to say is that more of them germinated. So another innovation that's going to occur during this time period that has to do with, I might also add that Jethro Tull's seed drill was not the only technology involved here, but it was one of the big ones. Another thing is the way that we used the fields in order to produce crops, and that is we're going to move away from the old medieval 3-field system and adopt this 4-field system of crop rotation, which is going to involve leaving, it's going to involve rotating crops with other crops in order to restore the nutrients. All right, so it used to be that what they would do is they would have, let's say you've got a farm here and you've got 1, 2, 3 fields, and you would leave this one fallow, and you would put something here, and then you would put something here. And then the next season, you would have the same setup, but then this would be fallow, which means there's nothing being produced there, and you would rotate the crops. Right? That's the old medieval system. Now, the reason they would leave the field fallow is because it enabled the land to recover its nutrients. But what they've discovered during the during this period leading into the second agricultural revolution is that they can have 4 fields. And they can have something like, a turnip right here, and some other kind of crop that maybe is more like, something that might grow on top of the soil. It's not like a root crop, for example, something like wheat. And what they can do is they can switch the crop so that the root crops will actually restore the soil nutrition while they're also producing crops that can be used and that can be consumed by people. And so what this does is it enables farmers to produce substantially more crops using the same amount of land that they've always used. And that right there is a big deal, and it's going to have social and political consequences as well. All right? Now, I specifically used turnip as my example here, and I referenced a guy named Turnip Townsend, who was a scientist who kind of experimented with this 4-field crop rotation system. And so he's kind of credited with the science behind this system and increasing crops by using this form of 4-field crop rotation rather than the old medieval 3-field system. All right, about to turn up. Okay, so Robert Bakewell was another scientist, one of these scientific farmers, who uses selective breeding in order to make fatter livestock. So, people over time, we've been doing selective breeding on plants and animals for as long as we've domesticated animals and as long as we've been cultivating crops. And what this means is that if we want the best crop, we're going to plant seeds from the best crop. Plant the best seeds, you get the best crop. And this is not something that you need all kinds of scientific understanding to get. Farmers have known this for a long time. And it's the same way when you think about the traits that you want to appear in domesticated animals. And so what Robert Bakewell does is he starts using selective breeding technique to make fatter livestock by breeding the fattest mutton. Okay, mutton is like, sheep or something of that nature. And so he was able to increase the amount of meat that people are going to have. You got people like Townsend and people like Jethro Tull who are increasing the amount of crops that we're going to have. And this right here is going to really set the way and pave the way for industrialization. Part of the reason why you need to have this second agricultural revolution is because you need less farmers in the rural communities, and in turn, you need more workers in the urban communities and the cities. And these cities are going to start to emerge due to the lack of jobs in farming, because fewer people are creating more food than ever, and also because there's going to be a huge demand for work in factories that are going to cause cities to shoot up out of literally nowhere in a matter of years. And the first place you're going to see this is going to be Great Britain. Okay, so industrialization begins here. And there are several reasons for it. One of those reasons might be because there was relative peace. There was no wars that were taking place on British soil. So even if you look back at the Napoleonic Wars, at the 30 Years' War, at the Crimean War, all these different wars Britain had been in, they have all taken place on the mainland Europe. They did not take place in Great Britain. And so people had this sense of peace, like it's not going to affect how we live, and that's going to lead to more innovation over time. There's also, and this here I think is key, there is tons of resources and rivers and harbors and all sorts of different things that are needed for early industrialization right here in Great Britain. So, in order to really spell it out, we got to look at one of these factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Now, wait a second. We're talking about some econ here. Yes, we are. When it comes to land, you need to have not just any old land, but land that's conducive for the kinds of work that you want it to do. You have to use the land, adapt the land, and make it work for your craft. In this case, it's gonna be near water. It's gonna be situated near water. It's gonna be situated near resources. You gotta make sure your factories are built in places where you can get people to go and do work, and you can get these resources to those factories to be produced. You also need, obviously, labor is going to be the people that are going to be doing the work. And you need to know where they're going to be. You need to have the means by which to pull them to a community where you need them to be. And this is going to lead to urbanization. As many of these factories grow up, cities are going to emerge around them. You also need to have capital. Now, capital is a fancy way for money, but also it can be any kind of machines or any kinds of goods that are going to bring about your capacity to make revenue. And so you might think that this here might be capital goods, things like the machines. And we know that many of these earlier inventors were building these machines in Great Britain. And then finally, entrepreneurship, the ability for someone to take risks to build a business. Okay, and this could be build a business, create a new machine, make an invention, whatever it might be. You need to have the willingness to spend money on taking a risk to build a business. And so it just so happened that of all the European countries, Great Britain is going to be the first one to have all those things, which means it's going to be the first to begin industrialization like we know it today. And the first industry, all right, the first industry to experience this revolution is going to be the textile industry. And when we talk about textiles, it's a simple word for cloth. Okay, it's a simple word for cloth. So what they did was everybody needs to wear clothes, and you also need different types of cloth for other purposes as well. So it makes sense that you're going to want to produce a lot of this very fast. Prior to Industrial Revolution, many people only had maybe one outfit. They didn't have a whole lot of clothes like we do today because it was really hard and labor intensive, and it took a lot of time to produce the clothes that people wore, because they had to do them all by hand with raw materials from something like a sheep or cotton or whatever it might be. So the hand loom, this hand loom right here, is the way that people used to take thread and weave cloth out of it. And you can imagine that this took a long time. This right here would be the thread on a bobbin. Okay, thread on a bobbin. And this boat-looking thing is called a flying shuttle. And what it does is it moves back and forth right here, and then you make it go over, and then you move it back, and then you make it go under, and you move it this way, make it go over, move it back, under, this way, over, this way. And what that does, you guys have all done this probably in art or in elementary school or in summer camp. You're able to weave a sheet or a sheet of cloth by doing that again and again and again. And you're doing it by hand, and it's super time consuming and pretty monotonous and probably get old really fast. So what my boy James Hargreaves does is he invents the spinning jenny. Now I think I've got a picture of the spinning jenny in here. I hope I do. If not, there's one in your book. But what this does is it enables one dude to manage 3 threads. So it used to be that they would have to weave the thread and put it around the bobbin manually by hand, and that would have taken a very long amount of time. But what he could do with the spinning jenny is use water power to essentially spin 8 threads of yarn at a time, and it radically increased the amount of time, I guess decreased the amount of time that's required. And then you start to see the cottage industry emerge, where many people had these hand looms. They had these hand looms that they would grab extra yarn and start weaving stuff from home that they could then sell. And so you start to see the beginning of, I guess, the output of cheaper materials simply by improving this process right here with the spinning of yarn. Okay, and then eventually you're going to see even more innovation with Richard Arkwright's water frame. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to use water power, and they use rivers as a source of power to run these machines. So I don't know if you guys have ever been to like a museum where you might have one of these contraptions here. This one here is what the water frame looked like, and they would have been belts that would run across the ceiling that would power this whole entire machine, and it would just do all the work for you. You didn't have to do anything but make sure the machine didn't stop running. And so as long as the water in the rivers is a continual source of power, the machine would never stop running. Problem is, you can imagine that ice can cause the river to stop. Drought, or if it never rains, the river might dry up to some degree, or the elevation might go down. And so that right there might reduce the productivity of these machines. You also got to think that building dams might be a fix for these things. However, when multiple factories begin to emerge up and downstream, the ones that are upstream are going to build a dam, and it's going to greatly reduce the amount of water that's going to get downstream to the other factories. So this was still going to be a problem, but it was a major innovation that really helped to fuel industrial revolution in the textile industry. And then finally,